Romans chapter 4 and verse 17 says, describing God who gives life to the dead, and listen to this, and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Isn't that's the gospel right there? That our God calls the things that do not exist as though they did. In the Christmas story, we were gently reminded that God calls those things that do not exist as though they did over and over and over again. Entering into the Christmas story, God calls an old lady, a barren old lady, and a doubting priest to bear the child that will be the forerunner for Jesus Christ. He calls those that do not exist as though they did. He called a young virgin to be the mother of Jesus. A young girl, a virgin that no one has any knowledge of who she is, to be the mother of Jesus. And we read in chapter 1, verse 48 of the book of Luke, that it seems like Mary understands this concept that Jesus calls that which does not exist as though it already does. Because in Luke chapter 1 and verse 48, Mary sings this song over her life and over herself. She says, "For behold, from now on, all generations will call me blessed." She sings this song as if it already is happening, even though at that point when she's singing that song, it is not happening at all. Mary is shameful to the nation, shameful to her family, because she's a young girl that is pregnant, and she got pregnant outside of wedlock, and now she's claiming some very interesting things, that her child is the child of the Holy Spirit. But Mary understood that God calls things which don't exist as though they do. And then God calls the shepherds. God calls the shepherds as though they were already evangelists. In the book of Luke, chapter 2, verse 14, in the same region there were shepherds out in the field keeping watch over their flocks by night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear. If we were reading this story for the very first time, we'd be amazed, more amazed than we are at the angels first speaking to these shepherds. But we would be amazed to find out what their calling is next. Because these were just shepherds, untrained men. But then in verse 16 and verse 20, the Bible tells us that these shepherds went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the manger. And when they saw the baby, they made known the saying that had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured up these things, pondering them in her heart. And the shepherds, listen to this, and the shepherds returned glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen as it had been told to them. God called those shepherds as if they were already evangelists, although they were not yet. But God knew what they would become when they had an encounter with Jesus Christ. They became the first evangelists of Jesus. Those three quick stories don't shock us nearly enough, because we're familiar with them. We've read them so many times that we read them. Okay, yeah, we know about Elizabeth, old lady has a baby. Nice. Mary, yes, virgin, has a baby. We like to sing the songs. Shepherds called to be the first evangelists for Jesus. But they don't shock us enough because we've read it so many times. We're so familiar with it that it's there. But if we were reading this for the first time, our mind would be blown at the way that God sets up this Christmas story and who God calls to be the pivotal characters in this story. He calls those who do not yet exist in this form to be that as if they already exist. This last week, my family and I, we went down to Glen Echo Park. It was the first time we'd been in that little park area. And we had bought tickets to this reenactment of C.S. Lewis's Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, a couple things we didn't know about the play when we bought the tickets. The first thing we didn't know is that it is only a two-person play. It's two people reenacting the entire C.S. Lewis Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The second thing that we didn't realize when we bought the tickets was that this play was primarily designed for children. And we discovered that when we walked in, and we were our family there, Christine and I and her parents and my kids, and we were sitting in the midst of hundreds of kids, public school kids, and their chaperones. Now, I want to set the scene for you of this moment, because this is how I think that if we had never heard the Christmas story before and we were hearing it for the first time, this is how we'd react. What was pretty obvious in that room was that these kids didn't come from the neighborhoods that most of us probably came from. What was also pretty obvious was that these kids did not have exposure to the genius that is C.S. Lewis, as many of us have had and many of our kids have had. This became clear in a number of ways. For one, when the two actors went into the wardrobe, to head to Narnia, these kids that were probably 4, 5, 6, 7 years old began to all go, ooh. And one kid behind me yells out, hey, what are you two doing in there? I hope you're not doing anything bad. And all the kids laughed, and they were saying all kinds of things. And I realized these kids have an understanding of, a boy and girl going into a closet that we don't understand. My kids, maybe even as teenagers, don't fully get. That was one thing. The other thing that you realize that they didn't quite understand it is that at every kind of pivotal moment, these kids were reacting with insanity. Like their minds were blown. For instance, when Aslan is laying on the stone table, the male actor was playing Aslan and all the other male parts, and Lucy is there by him crying because she thinks he's dead. When Aslan starts to move, the kids exploded. They started screaming, turn around! He's alive! He's awake! Turn around! Turn around! And she, being a good actress, turned to them and said, is something happening behind me? And they're like, yes! When he was moving, Christina and myself and my in-laws and my kids, we've all read the story. We've all read it many times. We're just sitting there nonplussed. But these kids who are seeing it for the first time are going, this is insane. What's happening? Pandemonium in there. It was pandemonium. If we were reading this story for the first time and we see story after story of a God who calls that which does not exist as though it already does, our minds would be blown. Our minds would be blown. I hope that you'll frame the Christmas story in your mind in that way. This Christmas season. This Christmas season. There's one other group that God calls to be a major part of this story. And it's a group that blows my mind. It's a group that blows my mind. And it's a group that reminds me that God has a mission for each and every one of us. Each and every one of us, no matter who we are and no matter what our background is. Because God calls that which does not exist as though it already does. And this group, this last group that plays a major part of the Christmas narrative is shocking to me, not because it seems peripherally like a bigger miracle than an old woman, barren woman having a child, or a virgin having a child, or angels appearing in the sky and talking to shepherds and calling them to be evangelists. It's shocking because it is a group that in our modern context even, in our modern frame of thinking, in our church context even, it is a group that we struggle to accept that God can use in the same way that he uses some of us. This group could potentially be classified as pagan, although maybe in our modern context, because we've seen this story so many times, we wouldn't go that far. But definitely in the Bible times, these individuals have been referred to as heathens or pagans. At the very least, even we would say that they are people that are on the fringe and probably not the best choice Probably not the best choice to play an important role in the mission of Jesus. But the Bible simply describes this group of individuals as magi or wise men from the east. Now let's understand again because who this group is, because we can see this story and we see these men bowing before Jesus. But according to the historian Herodotus, the Magi were the priestly caste of Media and Persia. And as the religion in Persia at the time was Zoroastrianism, these Magi were probably Zoroastrian priests. This religion that is centered in what is now modern day Iran, they understood truth by astrology, something that we definitely oppose in our context. They understood truth by studying the heavens and looking at the heavens and seeing that the heavens predict certain things and then having dreams about what those stars mean. The Magi, therefore, were concerned with what the movement of the stars meant when they saw that star in the sky. And they understood it in their context, in their religion, to signify the future affairs of history. And they understood it to mean, by their studies of other literature, to mean that there was some ruler of great importance that was going to be born. And this is what they say in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 2. And the Bible tells us that these people that were not of the faith that should understand these things were called to be the first persons to fully acknowledge Jesus as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Because God calls that which does not exist as though it already does. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the Bible tells us, in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, the wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. Then down in verse 9, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. And folks, if you were here last week, you understand this wasn't a slight curtsy. What the Bible is describing here is someone lying on their face. I'm not going to do it again this week. I did it last week. If you want to see that, you can go back and watch on YouTube, or it'll show up on Hope Channel in a few months, or next Christmas season, actually. You can watch it then. I laid on the ground multiple times here last week. My kids said, Dad, when you stood up, your face was so red, we thought something was wrong with you. One of them said, I thought you were a runner. I thought, why is your face so red? You should be able to get up off the ground. But they fell on their face and worshiped. It was more than just a bow of honor. This was them. Something was happening in their heart. And then they, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Imagine this. The greatest homage and devotion paid to Jesus in his young life was by people that didn't even come from the right belief system. But that's because God calls that which does not exist as though it already does. As though it already does. Before I say a word to those who might be on the fringes and saying, well, I'm just here because it's Christmas season, I like the songs, or I came with a family member. Some of you that may feel like, well, what would God have to do with me because of my struggles, my life, my current or my past year, whatever it may be. I want to say a word to us old head Adventists, and I include myself in that old head Adventism group. I was sitting with my son just yesterday on the couch, and Landon was playing with my hair, and he kept pushing it back and laughing. He said, Dad, you got a big forehead. And it's getting bigger. I'm one of those old head Adventists. I've been in this game a long time. But I would ask this question. Are we open to God using people? Unexpected people. Unexpected people groups people outside of our faith community to be part of God's mighty end time mission. Are we open to that? I won't mention any faith groups by name in this moment, but if you've been in this community of faith long enough, you can pick out a group or two, a denomination or two, a faith system or two that we might question whether or not anything good can come out of that people group. Does God have a mission for those on the fringes of the remnant, or maybe not yet even a part of the remnant of truth, to proclaim a part in proclaiming Jesus' second advent, just as he used a group outside of the remnant to proclaim the truth of Jesus' first advent, that this is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Does God have a mission for those people, and are we open to that? Listen to these statements from a great writer. Her name is Ellen White, one of the founders of this movement. Listen to what she wrote about these happenings. She said, outside of the Jewish nation, there were men who foretold the appearance of a divine instructor. These men were seeking for truth, and to them, the spirit of inspiration. And here, by the way, it's capitalized in the book. In other words, she's saying the same divine inspiration that inspired the writers of the Bible, that inspired myself. These people were seeking for truth, and thus the spirit of inspiration was imparted, one after another, like stars in the darkened heavens. Such teachers had arisen. Their words of prophecy had kindled hope in the hearts of thousands in the Gentile world. Or how about this thought? The light of God is ever shining amid the darkness of heathenism. They, now she's speaking of believers like you and I, they extol their religion and their own piety while they denounce the Greeks and the Romans as heathen and sinners above others. The wise men are not idolaters, and in the sight of God, they stand far higher than do these, his professed worshipers, yet they are looked upon as heathen. Do we do that? Do we do that to others? Maybe do we even do that to ourselves? I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'd like to have a better year in 2024 for Jesus, but I've wanted that before and I'm just not good enough. Do we do that to ourselves or to others? Just one more. Think about this one from the great book, Great Controversy, that I hope all of us read at some point. Listen to this. Notwithstanding the spiritual darkness and alienation from God that exist in the churches which we count as Babylon, she says, listen to what she says. The great body of Christ's true followers are still to be found in their communion. The great body of Christ's true followers are to be found outside of us. It's something for us as insiders to consider, but I use this point to say to those who are still just stepping into their faith journey, those who might think that possibly they've been made to feel that they are an outsider and thus don't have a mission for Jesus. I say to you, Jesus calls that which does not exist as though it already does. He calls people that study the stars and dreams to discover that he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He calls shepherds that spend their time being trained to watch sheep to be the first evangelists. He calls a virgin to be his mother, and he calls a barren woman to bear the child of his forerunner, because Jesus calls that which does not exist as though it already does. So if in 2024 you're convicted to be a light for Jesus in some way, I don't want you to think, well, I have to wait to know everything, or I've been too bad in the past. I have to get better in order before I can be a light or a missionary for Jesus, or I have to get permission from some priest or pastor. If you receive the call from God, watch how God will use you. You don't need to worry about what you think of yourself or what even others think of you. What matters is what Jesus sees in you that you don't even see in yourself yet. And And he sees someone who may not exist now, but by the grace of God already exists at some point in the future. I wanted to close this story by interviewing one of our family members in a way of this church. But unfortunately, they are out of town. But I called them and they said that I could share their story with you. And I share this story about this young lady who by many definitions is an outsider. Even by her own words and her own language, she says, I primarily, for many years, just been an attender of the Spencerville church, but not really part of the church. The lady I'm speaking of is Rebecca Abraham. Now, some of you may recognize that name and think to yourself, no, she's not an outsider. She's part of our church family. She's married to an Adventist, and she attends this church because she's married to that Adventist. But by birth and by christening, she is a Catholic young lady. She's a Catholic young lady. She does not understand much about the Bible, again, of her own admission. She told me until just recently, it had been like 12 years since I'd even opened a Bible. But last year, with all of our talk about connect groups, Rebecca felt convicted to start a group about something that she was passionate about. Connect groups, for those of you that may not know, are our small groups, and that's what we call them here. She felt convicted to start a connect group about something that she was passionate about. Pickleball. Any of you been to the pickleball connect group? Raise your hands higher. See a few of you that have been there. The pickleball connect group. She was passionate about pickleball, and she reached out to us and she said, I know I'm not a member, but I'd like to start this group. Is that okay? And when she talked to me on the phone, she talked to Pastor Candace, she talked to Carrie, and they called me and said, what do you think? And I said, yeah, I think it's a great idea. But Rebecca still called me to kind of just to check in, and she said, I don't know anything about the Bible really, so I won't be able to answer anybody's questions if they ask anything. I said, that's okay. She said, I'm not a member. She reminded me again. I said, I know. I said, but go ahead, start the group. She said, but maybe I can help people connect. I said, yeah, start the group. So Rebecca starts this pickleball group, and it's one of our most popular connect groups that is out there. Then Rebecca gets a second conviction. One Sabbath, she was sitting here in church listening to the sermon, and she heard me say this. And it was probably just a throwaway line, something that I didn't even maybe have written in the notes. She heard me say this. At the very least, if you're part of a connect group, you should be praying together. She just heard me say that. Now, I didn't know it at the time. Her husband, Seelan, didn't know it at the time, but she felt another conviction. And I still remember when Seelan texted me and said, Chad, last night Rebecca prayed with the pickleball group. And I got that text, and me being an awesome pastor, I gave an awesome pastorly response. I typed back cool and a thumbs up emoji. Great pastor, good pastoral response. Yeah, cool. I didn't know, but that was a significant moment for her. Rebecca told our Connect Group leaders at a recent Connect Group leaders breakfast, she said, that night I prayed for the pickleball group was the first time I'd ever prayed in public. First time she ever prayed in public. And now, every single week, they start pickleball with prayer. With prayer. By the way, there are people who are part of this pickleball group that have no connection with our church. Some people that are not even connected, we'd say, to Jesus. But because this outsider was called by God as though she were already an insider, people are coming where Jesus is being prayed to every week. Rebecca then told me that she often tries to take little things I say in the sermon. She's been trying recently to take little things I say in the sermon and share them maybe at the beginning of the pickleball group, because some of the people there, she said, don't go to church, so she tries to, so she's preaching now. So she's preaching. And then this last week when I asked Rebecca, I said to Rebecca, hey, are you going to be here? Can I interview you? And she said, oh, I'm not going to be there. I said, well, then can I tell your story? She said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And then as we were talking, she said, hey, I wanted to thank you. She said, I wanted to tell you something. She said, I didn't want to thank you. She said, I want to tell you something. At the Connect Group Leaders Breakfast, you shared that the most important minutes at the end of church are the 3 minutes right after the sermon ends, or right after the service ends, because that's when people that don't know anybody or aren't connected get up to leave and go out the door quickly. And so she said, I was sitting in church a few weeks ago, and there was a man in front of me that I'd never seen before, and I didn't recognize him, and I thought, oh, he might be new. And so before he could get up and leave, I tapped him on the shoulder, and I asked him a question about his iPad, and we began to talk. And she goes, I think he felt appreciated that I said something to him, because a few weeks later, I saw him come back. And she was all excited about this. Just by the way, you need to get her notes, because obviously everything I say she thinks is awesome, and she gets convicted, and you guys need to do the same thing. But she was so excited. Now, I don't know where this faith journey is going to take Rebecca. She did tell me that she's opened her Bible for the first time in 12 years. We know that she's praying. But what I do know is that God has a mission for each and every one of us. Each and every one of us. And so as we head into Christmas and transition into the new year, I want you to remember a story like Rebecca's. The stories that come from the Christmas story. Story like Rebecca's, she's not an Adventist. She just started reading the Bible. She only prayed for the first time in her entire life in public a few months ago. But she's now thinking about, how can I connect people to this community of faith? And why does that happen? Because God calls those things which do not exist as though they did. How do shepherds become evangelists? Because God calls the things that do not exist as though they do. How does a virgin have a child? Because God calls those things which do not exist as though they do. How is it that your heart and my heart can be changed? Because God calls those things which do not exist as though they already do. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, hit the like button here. Subscribe to our page for future videos, or for the next video, click the box right here.